Today I'm going to show you how I apply the Talens Oil Pastel varnish. Okay, so before I start, there's a couple of things to consider about this oil pastel varnish. This is the oil pastel varnish by Talens. It's actually my favourite oil pastel varnish. But as you can see, it's actually quite a small bottle. And we really need to get the most out of that. I mean, if you were to buy the Sennelier can, you'd be getting, I believe, 500 mils. Whereas on this, you only get 75 mils. So you've got to be a little bit careful with it. And also, this is either to be applied by a brush or something similar. I'll show you that in a second. There was talk that you can actually dilute this, and I do. A lot of people don't. I would consider it though, because it's going to make this last a lot longer, and it's not going to do anything to affect your painting in any way. What I would do, at the absolute maximum, I would do a 50-50 mix, and I actually have a bottle here that I'd half used, and I've mixed that with water 50-50. So I apply this as a first coat, and then I apply neat as a second coat, and that's all you need. You don't need any more. But as you can see, by doing that, I'm actually getting almost 3 times, I believe, the amount. So I had 75 in there, keeping it neat, 75 in there, and then doubling it, of course. So it's 150 and 75, 225 mils I'm getting out of that by just diluting one lot. But for people that are less experienced, maybe just do it a third of water and 2/3 varnish, because it does become quite liquefied when it's like in this state. So I'm now about to show you how I apply this. As you know, I did this tree in a demo, and I thought that was the ideal time now to actually show you how to apply this Talens Oil Pastel varnish. I'm putting that there. It's only a 75ml bottle. It gives you an idea of the fact that this is probably half of an A4 size painting, so just gives you an idea of the size. Now, things you do need to consider is, do you want brush strokes in your artwork? Personally, I don't like it. And if you do want brush strokes, then obviously you're going to have to apply it a bit thicker. So you can actually use the watered down version to begin with, just to put a safety layer on it. And then you can actually use the thicker version with a brush. But I use one of these. I use one of these sponge brushes, and this is about a 2-inch brush, or sponge brush I should say. Sponge applicator, I'm not really sure what the proper term for them is. But I have loads of them, and they're cheap as chips, and you can chuck them away. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with the watered down layer. Another thing you need to consider is that obviously you can see I'm stirring this as opposed to shaking it, because I don't really want the bubbles. So I'm stirring it. This is my dilute mix, 50-50. But another thing you need to consider is that when you close it up, you can see there's all dried up varnish around here. If you don't wipe that, it's going to make getting the top off the next time you want to use it quite a nightmare. So I'll just give it a little stir, using my scratcher as it happens. Right, I'll wipe that off. Don't hurt your scratcher, or just protect it if anything. What I do is, you can either siphon this into a bowl or something like that. I sometimes have put them in like a ramekin. I found the best way for me is to actually just pour it directly on, but just obviously be careful. And I pour it, consider this is quite watery, straight down the centre like that. And then from there, I spread it out. Now this is actually probably a little bit more than I need, but it needs spreading out, of course. And then I just spread it from the middle outwards. This way, I'm getting a really nice uniformed coating. Another thing to consider is that I would let your painting cure for a couple of days at least before you do this. And another thing you need to consider is if it's on pastel matte, because of the texture of pastel matte, if you're doing this, it could dislodge some of that pastel and come into the outer areas. So if that was dark, it could come into the outer areas, and then you'd obviously have to cover it again, and that's why you have to let it cure for a couple of days at least. You can see I don't want to overdo that. I've actually probably done it a bit more than I should because I'm talking. But that's a uniformed layer. So I'm hopefully going to get a reflection on this so you can see that I've covered everything there. And now it's just a case of letting it dry. If you can't see that, get your head down here. I'm trying to do it. Get it down here and see where you can see all the reflection. And one thing you do need to be aware of again is that you could end up with little pieces like I'm now pulling off, and dust is another thing, so try and do it in an area where it's not so dusty. So that's my first layer done with diluted oil pastel Talens varnish. I'm going to let that dry. I would let that dry probably for a couple of hours at least, and then we're going to come back and we're going to put the main coating on. And then, so I've left this varnishing for a couple of hours now. I'm going to reuse my sponge. If it's slightly damp, that doesn't matter. Another thing to remember is that wherever you put a wet medium, such as varnish, onto, in this case, a watercolour type paper, then you will end up with slight buckling. Not so much where the oil pastel is, so if you've covered the whole page, that's great, but if you haven't and you go outside of the edges of the picture, you'll end up with a slight buckle, which you'll see when I show you the next layer. As you know, this was a watered down version. There's nothing coming off, look, nothing whatsoever, so you can use it watered down if you really want. Oh, it was a tiny little bit, that must be a bit, because it doesn't actually fill every crevice when it's like that, because you need the second layer, but it is so minimal it's unbelievable. So let's now put the top layer on. I'm just going to put a little bit on here again like I did before. Doesn't need to be quite so much of this, and again wipe the top because that will undoubtedly stick. If you want to get a bit of the oil pastel varnish off, use your sponge, that's not going to hurt, and wipe the top. Okay, so again, I'm going to start from the middle, I'm going to spread it out either way. And you get a lovely uniformed layer of this though. And there's nothing coming off, and I'm going to go backwards and forwards, not too much, up and down, and maybe just one more time, and there you go. Now I'm going to leave it and it's going to dry lovely. If you see anything on there, have a good inspection, something that might be fluffy or anything like that, because that is what this is prone to. As far as I can see, there's nothing. I think that might have been a little bit of oil pastel varnish there, but it hasn't done anything to the picture, so we're not going to worry about it. There we go, don't overdo it. And again, wash out your sponge, and it just washes out with water. So to have a recap just before we come to the end of this video is very important really, because I don't want any of you guys messing up your pictures. So let your picture cure for a day or two minimum, preferably a week, especially if you're going to apply it by a brush, and especially if you've done a thick impasto type painting. If you have done an impasto type painting, I would suggest that the best thing to do would be to use a spray varnish, because the brush in particular will smear your oil pastel if you haven't let it cured for a while, and that will bring the colour out into your other colours and make it look a little bit dirty. So that's very important to begin with. So the sponge is best, I would always use a sponge if that was me, because you're not going to get that problem quite so much. And also, it kind of acts like a bit of a spatula, and it gives you a thinner coating. And you're not going to use so much varnish. Importantly, wipe the jar off. If you don't, that varnish is going to dry and the top is going to be secured to that lid. And if you're not very strong, you're not going to be able to get it off. I mean, I'm fortunate enough that I'm quite strong, and even took me one hell of a job to get it off. What you'll end up with, before I show you this picture, is a satiny look, a very smooth look, especially if you apply by a sponge, and it will almost look photographic in its appearance. Not your picture, but in its appearance, it will almost look photographic. A bit like you would see photographs that have like this satin look to them. It looks a bit like that. You can add water, only to the first layer, I would say. That would give you plenty of protection if you just want to store it. But I wouldn't go any more than 50-50 mix. 30-70 would be ideal, I would say, for most people, because it does become very watery otherwise and quite hard to handle. If you have mixed it with water in particular, on the bare paper, it could buckle the paper somewhat. You'll see that on what I'm about to show you. That's not a problem. You know, it's dried flat, especially where the oil pastel is, so that's all we're really concerned with. If it doesn't get as flat as you want, just shove it between a few books for a day or two. It'll soon flatten off, and it'll be protected by the varnish. Apply it with a sponge applicator for smooth, thin washes, if you like. It's a wash of varnish, isn't it? That's what you'll get. If you want brush marks, do it with a brush and thicker concentrated varnish. And one of the most important things, before it dries, you have to consider where you're doing this. I'm in my studio at the moment, so I don't have much in the way of dust kicking about or hairs or anything like that. But if I was in the house and I decided to do it in there, I have dogs, I have cats, I have all sorts of things going on in there, and you will end up with dust and hair in places you probably don't want them. So I think the best thing to do is to try and pick them off somehow, and then just way before it dries, just go over it with your sponge applicator. Perhaps use a cocktail stick for some of it. The bits that you can't get off, you could just pick them off with your fingers, as long as you smooth it all over again, because it'll be wet enough for you to be able to do that. So I'm just about to show you the finished picture, and that'll be the end of my video, and I hope that has been worthwhile. So until next time, whomever you are, have a great day, great week and a great year, and I will catch up with you in the next video. So as you can see, it's in the light at the moment, so it's got the reflection of the light, but if I move that away, you can see it's made it look very clear. It's really brought out the vibrancy, and you probably can't really see too much because it's actually such a thin layer of, there we go, if I do that you can see the varnish, and it's a lovely thin layer. I love this effect. It's completely different to the Sennelier effect, which looks a bit more waxy and thick in its application. But there you go, that's how you'll end up looking. And of course the texture of your paper will come through as well. So I absolutely love this, I really do. So I'm just going to point out one thing to you. I said about smearing. If I show you and zoom in here, you can see there's some little graininess gone on here. That's because maybe some of the pastel was a bit thick here, and I've smeared it on, and it's took the colour with it and mixed in. If that happens, just go over it with some more oil pastel. But if you let it dry enough, it's not going to affect it in any way. I've done loads of paintings with this varnish, and in all honesty, this was a demo, so it was quite quick. Anyway, until next time, look after yourselves, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye for now.